welcome back to the Prosperous Empath. Kat here. I have been looking forward to not only recording, but sharing this conversation with you for, I think the last 5 or 6 months. This is one that's been in process of us recording for a while now, and you are in for a treat today. I'm thrilled to have Dr. Susan Laverick join me on the podcast. Susan and I were connected through Jen Corcoran over on LinkedIn. Jen is someone she was actually my first guest on the show, and she's introduced me with so many guests that I've had join me. And this was just an amazing conversation about how to really own your value and step into your own authentic voice as an empath, how to speak compellingly and powerfully as an empath from the stage, on a podcast, or otherwise. And if you've been listening for a while, you know that this is a topic that's really personal for me because becoming a stronger public speaker is something that has been a personal challenge for me. And it was one of the reasons that I initially got inspired to launch the podcast in the first place, because I have a lot to say, and sometimes I don't really know how to say it. And something that really resonated with me from today's conversation with Susan is that isn't surprising for empaths, that's actually a common experience, because sometimes as empaths, when we're really trying to figure out how do we own our value, it can be really hard to determine that separate from who we are for other people, how we provide value to other people, how we respond to other people or help other people. And when you're learning how to become an effective and compelling public speaker, you really need to learn how to stand behind what you say on your own. And that's been one of my greatest challenges and joys from launching this podcast, over a year and a half ago now. And we talk a lot about that journey and so many of the breakthroughs that I've personally overcome in becoming a more effective public speaker through podcasting alone in today's conversation. So if public speaking is something that you are wanting to do more of, you're wanting to gain more visibility and just become a more compelling speaker, then I think that you will really enjoy this conversation. So a little bit more about our guest, because she's amazing. Susan's first-class communication background has spanned Citigroup and the BBC in London. Today, her Geneva-based consultancy in Switzerland provides clients with practical tools in the gravitas to perform as powerful communicators. They include entrepreneurs, corporate, humanitarian organizations, the WTO, and tomorrow's leaders. She trains peacebuilders and entrepreneurs to pitch major projects to investors, prepare laureates for speeches at UN events in Geneva and New York, prepares candidates for public interviews, and trains TEDx speakers. She mentors emerging women leaders across sectors, enhancing their authority and gravitas by focusing on their communication repertoires. She's published articles on the subject in a U.S. peer-reviewed journal. She's also a guest lecturer at the Geneva Graduate Institute and the University of Geneva, where she teaches the art of ethical and influential communication to future leaders. Her doctorate in English was completed on an Australian government research scholarship for scholars of exceptional promise. She has an MA in history and is an ICF-trained executive coach. Today, we're going to dive into Susan's story. We're going to talk about the importance of self-actualization and owning your value instead of finding it through giving to other people and being of service to others. We dig into understanding your ethos, becoming proud of who you are, and sharing the real you with your audience. We also touch on the art of body language and how to authentically embody your message for better self-expression, and how to cultivate conviction and enroll others in your message so you can grow your community and your impact. I hope that you enjoy this conversation. If you'd like to come spend some more time personally with yours truly, come join me in my online community. You can find the link in the show notes, and you're welcome to join us for our next non-networking power hour, which is our monthly gathering for empathpreneurs to come and request support and get meaningfully supported by like-minded empathpreneurs. The upcoming event is on Monday, July 15th at 12 noon Eastern Time, and the link for both are in the show notes. And with that, let's dive into today's conversation. I really hope you enjoy it. Hello and welcome to the Prosperous Empath podcast, designed especially for empaths and highly sensitive entrepreneurs just like you who are committed to achieving holistic success. I'm your host, Catherine Wood, Master Certified Coach, author, mastermind leader, and founder of Unbounded Potential, a boutique coaching firm for empathic entrepreneurs. I'm on a mission to bring empathy back into the world of business. Each episode will focus on achieving more by doing less through leveraging empath-friendly leadership practices, boundaries, rituals, and systems, all the while continuing to care deeply about ourselves, others, and the world around us. If you are committed to joyful living and running a conscious business, but amassing wealth while doing so, proving that you can have both in a society that tells you you can't, then you are in the right place. Join me here each week to find out how. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review so you won't miss an episode. Plus, you'll find all the show notes and helpful resources over at unbounded-potential.com. Susan, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. I know that we rescheduled our episode when I was traveling in France impromptu on a very last minute trip last month. And today feels like the perfect day to have you on the show. So welcome.
Thank you very much, Catherine. It's a privilege to be on your podcast.
Well, by way of getting us started, I'd love for us to land a little by inviting you to share your pronouns and then a little bit about your story, because I think that we all learn through the power of storytelling.
Absolutely. And funnily enough, I had this conversation in Paris last week with a client about the power of storytelling, even though this was a major global corporation. And they stopped and thought, yes, this storytelling is so it can be transformational for the audience and those who are telling. So my pronouns are she, her. And what can I tell you that isn't staid and flat, because I'm neither of those things. I love bright colors, as you can see. I love beauty. I love aesthetics. And I love language. I love words. I love the power of writing to shape human thinking, to challenge our thinking, from literature to poetry to obviously serious books about communication. And so with that little amuse-bouche, as you've been in Paris, we can segue into the lovely language of food. I've worked with words all of my life, and that seems to be quite a few decades, because I'm quite avance of you in terms of the age. And I think it really, when I was 14, I said to my father, I want to be an actress. And he said, no daughter of mine is going on the stage without a degree. And so I went and did literature and history. And then, of course, life sends us on our own paths. But from that moment, as a child, reading, to at school, studying, and ending up with my first real job in London with an American bank. And I was just a very green Australian who just arrived in London. But I think for me, when you ask me a little bit about what it is that motivates me, it really was boosted by my time at the BBC, which is when I saw the power of the media, the good old media, not the distorted media that we have today. And just really realizing this world of communication was something that resonated very deeply within me. I wasn't a journalist, but I worked in a fairly public-facing role. And we had to leave London because my husband was, he had a big promotion and we came to Geneva. But although it was heartbreaking at the time, I have learnt, although I didn't know this at the time, that every challenge is actually an opportunity. And so over time, I just had to regroup, pivot, and decide what can I do with the skills I had. And really that segued into communication. And long story short, it's where I am today, which is an independent consultant, my own boss. I love it. The thought of going back into an organization, someone said, "Oh, we must offer you a job." And I thought, oh, how will I turn them down if they offer it to me? I'm such a free spirit. So working in the way I like, which is ethics-based, high-value communication, whether it's lecturing at the universities in ethical communication, whether it's teaching pitching and communication skills to peacebuilders in conflict-prone zones, or even corporations, which seems to be my latest feather in my hat, which I would never have expected, given I had really carved a niche. And I suppose it's just often being very thankful that my passion for words and writing and how we communicate is something I get to do almost every day. And whether it's refining a speech or helping someone write a speech or delivering a speech, because I'm a Gemini and I just love.
Oh, I love that you're a Gemini. My husband is a Gemini, and it's your season. Welcome to birthday season.
I know, it's so exciting. I have to keep very sensible about it though, because it's not always all about me, as my daughters say. But I think it's that notion of just being, and I'm not being happy clappy here, but being very grateful that I've arrived at a point in my life where I can help other people with my teaching, with my lecturing, and above all, and it's very important to me, in the peace building sector, where I mean, obviously I can't go into conflict zones, I'd be a hazard, but I can support the people who are working in peace building programs. And I do work very closely with a number of NGOs as a communication advisor. So that is where I am now. And when I look back, I just think how lucky I am, because you know how, and I think you're the same, because you're doing something which, as we say in French, c'est tu as trouvé l'épanouissement. You know this is your vocation. And had I stayed at the BBC, much as I loved and adored it, and I was dragged kicking and screaming all the way to Geneva, I would never have found this niche and this end of career. Well, I'll be working until I'm 90. So, but this final step and this whole notion of human design, which Jen Cochrane introduced me to, and there's so much truth in that every age brings wisdom, but not until we get to our 50s do we really begin to understand messages from the past or things that have happened. So I shall stop there because I could go on.
Well, I actually love seeing you go on and take up so much space. And, you know, I often don't know where I want to enter a conversation from, and it just emerges. And that's exactly where I want to enter the conversation, like the idea of just going on, because I started this podcast over a year and a half ago because I realized that I had a lot to say, and I wasn't giving myself the space or grace to say it, because I didn't think that my message had importance. I didn't think that it had enough meaning, right? And so I think that is a struggle that many empaths find in common, that we care so deeply about our work. We want to be of service so profoundly, and yet we don't necessarily give ourselves the space to take up and the stage to claim and the audience to speak to. And I think that's a real mindset shift that I've gone through over the past decade, and a lot of my clients do as well. And, you know, we started this conversation me sharing my own belief about the importance of storytelling. And I used to never tell stories because I didn't want to take up that much time. I didn't want to take up that much of other people's time. So I would just share, the distinction or the formula. My background is as an economist. So I think in formulas. So I'm often very succinct and very brief. And we don't learn through succinctness. We learn through feeling one another and the power of intimacy. And so I guess, I know that you love working with female entrepreneurs and leaders. I know that you have a soft spot for that. And so I'm wondering, how do you support your communications clients in giving themselves more permission to take up more space?
I think that's one of the most important questions that someone has asked me in recent times. And the situation you just explained, as an economist, fact-driven analysis, not dwelling too long on this because it's the global picture and the final analysis. And the question I always ask people, because I have learnt it myself, and I'm quite evangelical about it, which is, if we don't know our value, then no one else will know the value of you or me. And that's often my starting point, because you and I both know that not every woman, because there's some very strong, successful women in the C-suite and in entrepreneurs and in the peace building sector, for example, by the way, but not, I would say 60% of women are like us and have worked through this process. And what is your value? And then that taps into, it's imposter syndrome, or it's, I was brought up not to talk about myself, not to boast, not to brag. And it's very difficult to push people into that space which is open, and to interrogate, this is you, these are your skills, but you're not activating, this notion of self-actualization, which I've always been very interested in. You're not, I'm talking about the women some of the women I work with, you're not getting to that point because there's this obstacle of not acknowledging, well, actually, you're really good at X, Y, and Z. Oh, yes, I am. And I hate the phrase because I'm such a purist when it comes to English language, but if people aren't owning that value, then they'll go through the motions. And I think often I meet women, especially, who have that sense of, it's not bitterness, but it's a sense of almost loss. Did you ever read The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton?
I have.
Oh my God, one of my favorite Edith Whartons. And at the very end, Newland Archer ponders on his successful life, and he's been rich and famous, and he's got 4 amazing children, but he feels somehow the flower of life has passed him by. And of course, that was his love for Irene. And I often say to these women, don't be like Newland Archer, please. Whatever it is, don't lose it. And because if we can't acknowledge it ourselves, it'll remain here and it'll be our secret. It's like, I love writing, and I'm always writing in my spare time when I have spare time. And someone says, what are you doing? And I'll say, well, I've finished my novel, and I have actually, because it's my passion. And I'm not saying it's going to be published, because we know publishing is very hard, but it's something which I knew I could do. It was in there and it had to come out. And that's a process women have to go through, sometimes men, but, and I often feel very sad and filled with deep compassion, which isn't pity, for these people who struggle to articulate their value. And sometimes it's, what is your passion? What really is, what is driving you? No, not the love of your family. That's taken. That, not the love of this or that. What is it that if you couldn't do would make you think, I won't flourish. So
I could not agree more. And I also just want to be mindful. I notice we're talking about through the lens of gender, which I introduced, but I've actually noticed across the board that owning your value is a theme for empaths. almost across the board, because for empaths in particular, especially for those of us who haven't done some of our deeper healing work, we often find our value through being of service, through doing for other people, through helping, through caring, through giving. And when it's externally acquired, when our value is externally quantified, externally measured, it can result in burnout and fatigue and exhaustion and a sense of not knowing who we are, what our own authentic truth is, separate from who we be for and to other people. And I also just want to share, I think you'll find this really insightful. From a coaching perspective, two of the I would say the tools in my toolkit that I've noticed over the years most support clients in doing that inner work of owning their value. The first one is acknowledging wins, because I noticed that the more comfortable we get acknowledging our own wins, celebrating our successes, having a healthy sense of pride around our accomplishments, we can take that perhaps intellectual knowing of our wins and our accomplishments, and with time and with practice and with repetition, they actually become an embodied knowing of who we are and our identity and our contribution. So that's the first. And then the second is acknowledgement. I end every coaching session by asking my clients what they'd like to be acknowledged for, or who they'd like to be acknowledged for being. And a theme in the beginning of our work together is just complete resistance. Oh, I don't want to be acknowledged. Oh, I didn't do anything worthy of acknowledgement this week. Oh, but Kat, I showed up in complete breakdown to our call today. Like, please don't acknowledge me. And I've noticed over the years that it's often come to be the highlight of a session, because clients and me too, like, we're actually more willing to let it in when we put down that resistance and that need to prove that we're worthy or deserving of acknowledgement or being celebrated or being recognized. We can start to really do some of that breaking down of this idea, this myth, and this really common theme in coaching, that our value has to be externally quantified or proved versus internally owned or identified. And so I share that to say, I mean, I think it could be useful for some of our listeners, and as a real entry point, because I would love to hear from your own perspective. What are some more of the communication and tactical and easy wins for clients who are really wanting to own their message and enroll other people in their message, and what are some of, from your vantage point, what are some of your teachings?
Again, that's a profound question, which I'm delighted that you have articulated, because what you're touching on is something it's an interior strength. And just going back to celebrating wins, which is what we all must do, because otherwise they'll pass us by and we'll think, well, I didn't achieve anything, and then acknowledging something which is very important. But so I'm just engaging with that. But for me, any session I start, whether it's with peace laureates who are being recognized for their humanitarian work, often they're presenting at the UN in New York, which is always a lovely excuse for me to go to New York, or in Geneva, or it could be peace builders who are going into the field and they need to be more authoritative, because women in this hierarchy of peace building, there are less women than there are men, but that's just the way it works out. But women are brilliant mediators. And also the young leaders I'm teaching who are at postgraduate level, to me, it all comes down to, and I can teach people how to pitch. I can give them techniques and strategies. I can do all of that, and I love it. But the first thing we start with is, again, it's values-based, understanding who you are. Because and my question is, when we go around a room, especially a 3-day program, it's very intensive, and they probably expect me to start off telling them how to do this. I'm very interactive, and I really get a lot out of them. It's the authenticity part of communication, because communication is communal. Conversation is communal. We're engaged in it all the time. Some of us are better at it than others, because some of us like talking more. Some of us are more shy. We're not very good. We hesitate. But I always start with the Aristotelian model, which goes back 3,000, 2,000 years, which is understanding our ethos. What is the person? Who are we trying to project? Because people, audiences, wherever, they hate frauds, and they'll sniff one out immediately. So being comfortable with who you are, and you might be an introvert or an HSP or I'm probably a hybrid, because I do like being on show, but then there are times when I think, I just want to go and get my book and write. But it's that, who really are you? Because I want to see that person, not someone you've modeled yourself on by watching 9,000 TED Talks, and you've acquired all these tricks and tips from politicians because you think they work. So that authenticity conversation, and obviously the understanding, what is it I'm trying to communicate? Because if you don't understand what you're trying to say, no one else will. And often it comes back to that authenticity model. What do I really need to share here? And this is why I talk about ethics-based or values-based communication. What is it that I'm trying to share that is going to be of value and use in whatever context? And then coming back to your emphasis on storytelling, it's, if we can engage with our authenticity, ethos, our logos, what is it that we're really trying to share, then the classic notion of pathos, which is where your storytelling comes in so beautifully, and if we can accomplish all of those things, then a communication piece, and I'm talking generally, not just an ordinary conversation, obviously, but if it's a professional piece, it will work with training, but it is the foundation. And the first one is that ethos, that authenticity piece. And sometimes people struggle with that. And from a psychological and philosophical point of view, and you can imagine with sometimes 25 people in a room, that I've become quite adept, and I would never have called myself an empath. And I was very flattered that you used that word, because I think I'm just a very good listener. I wouldn't put myself in that category, but I have learned to be able to pick up when people are holding back. And this is something I've only realized. I've come into this, I'm not going to say power, because it isn't, it's just an awareness of others. And every time I run a program, I have a queue of people afterwards saying, this was the best course. And it wasn't because I'm the best presenter or trainer, because there are brilliant presenters and trainers like me, where I'm in a profession of peers who are brilliant. But I know it's because I spend that extra time looking not into their souls, not windows into people's souls, but just taking that time to make them think about, rather than taking it for granted. Oh, communication. Okay, let's write the speech. Let's look at the angle. And it's, to me, it can make the difference between capturing an audience's attention and then an audience wanting to hunt you down afterwards. Because I know this, I'm a keynote speaker. I'm being honest. I'm owning my achievement. I always have people afterwards coming up to me and saying, oh, love that speech, it was great. And I think, well, that's because you got me, not someone that's been modified, or I've got to be a bit less, because sometimes, and I'm very conscious not to be the diva, because that was the actress struggling to get out. But for me as well, it's really interesting, this thing you asked me. And to me, and we're not dissimilar in what we do, because what we're trying to accomplish, I think, is you're helping people find self-knowledge. And through that self-knowledge, it's unlocking Aladdin's cave. And then they, oh my gosh, I had no idea. This suits me. This is what I need to do. And for me, that self-knowledge comes through understanding, who am I? What kind of communicator am I? What do I struggle with? And sometimes I'm always so moved when the people who say I'm an introvert, I hate public speaking, and we know introverts are very drained by people like me, so I have to just, tone it down. But they will make the best speeches. I had a young lady who gave a TEDx talk. I trained these people in Geneva, and hers was the best because she went through everything. She did everything I told her. She, within the context of what she was trying to achieve. But that's really just to say that by opening, it's almost like releasing, giving people glasses that they can look in a mirror and think, that is who I am, and I can be proud of that person, and I can use some training here. But self-awareness, that's what it is. I think that's for me so powerful. And we know that self-awareness is the foundation of modern leadership, successful leaders.
I love so much of what you shared. Just a reflection. As you speak, I notice I'm feeling you. And I imagine one of the reasons your listeners come up to you after is because you let them feel you, which is a real trait of an empath. So I want to go in this direction of authority, because you talk about this idea of helping your students become more authoritative. Mm-hmm. And I think that there are many different forms of being authoritative, and I'm imagining it varies for the different types of students you have and leaders and entrepreneurs you train. And I think that for empathpreneurs and for those of us who are heart-based, that can also be a challenge. How do we become more authoritative, hold more conviction in what we have to say? And I'm also just appreciating that in your work with peace builders, becoming authoritative is a necessity, is a must. And you already shared that there are many less female peacemakers in the field than male. And so how does your work differ, helping different types of clients become authoritative in their message and with the conviction of their message? Does it vary by gender, values, types of students you teach? What is that journey like? How can we become more authoritative based on who we are?
It's a foundational question for communicating with authority. And not so long ago, I was teaching a session, which I love. I have 2 university guest lectureships, and I just love them because I have these students who, I call them students, they're in their early 30s, so their early career. And this notion of authority always comes up. And it comes up across the ages, across the métier, the professions. Some people, I think, misunderstand. It's a little bit like when we talk about the difference between assertive and aggressive responses. And I'm always encouraging people to be more assertive, because if we hold back, then people won't hear our voice. And I think that was something I wrote down when you were really talking through that interesting layers of onions, the onion layers that were coming out of that conversation. I think we're going to have to write a paper here. There's so much of interest. For me, it's important that people know, wherever they are, how to speak truth to power. And I suppose that's a foundational ethical value that I have, because I was brought up in that way. And I think increasingly in our world, organizations, whatever sector they might be, it is imperative that people know how to do this. Then they're not frightened by leadership, or they know that they can go and speak to someone and say, actually, I have very valid reasons for disagreeing with how this process was introduced or whatever. And so for me, I think it's authority is something we grow into, but some of the tools will help us. And I think the authority is also linked to that authenticity piece. And often the highly sensitive people say to me, I have no authority. And yet they do. They do. They just need a little bit of a boost and to believe in it. And it's believing what we have to say is worth saying, but knowing how to say it is another thing. And then daring to say it. And I'm always talking about the importance of using a mixture of a communal and agentic language. And it was really interesting. I was in Paris last week doing a session, which was amazing. And the way some of these gentlemen were speaking, and it was a mix of, it wasn't board level, but it was one down. They were fairly senior. The men were using communal language as well. And they were talking about how they were dealing with interruptions during pitches to stakeholders. And I thought this was really interesting. And the language they were giving me, and I listened and I wrote some of them down, and I said, but you are undermining your authority and the organizations by saying, if I might just be so bold as to, may I possibly suggest, and normally, talking about gender stereotypes, we would have thought, well, that would have been the three ladies, but they were just looking and nodding, and these were gentlemen. And I think it's knowing our weak points and understanding that we have a choice of language. There's so many phrases we can practice using. So that's one of the tips I give. I have a list of them, and I say, you've got to start using some of these. The moment you start saying, oh, we all helped each other, it was a collaborative effort, and no one person was the best, that is something nice to think. But at some point we have to not say, I did all the work, so I get all the attention. But it's I believe every pitch, every work endeavor is an ensemble production, and each person has their part to play. So I'm sorry, I'm probably getting sidetracked by just thinking about all this agentic language and the way people need to mix it, but not overuse it or underuse the agentic. But above all, it's how we frame a message, and I think that's really what I spend a lot of my time doing. I mean, honestly, I feel like a counselor, a language specialist, a psychological helper, all these things, because people would think they come into a session, we're just going to learn about pitching. We're just going to learn how to communicate with gravitas. And that is not the case. It's like you're coaching, the work you're doing. It is transformational, transformative. But what you do in that session will change over a series of sessions. How this person regards themselves, how they interact with their workplace or their colleagues, and I think for me it's such an important thing for people to understand. How am I going to frame this message so that it will be understood, people will value it, and they will respect me and the organization? And that's very important, obviously, in the peace building sector, where I have been, I'm jumping all over the spot, but I'm just thinking of an organization I support in Bosnia, which, as you would know, is in the Balkans, and beautiful country with a history of civil war. And it's that notion of giving these ground, we don't use the word peace, we use harmony, because war and peace have very polarizing impacts. But what can I give these volunteers that will make them more powerful ambassadors for a particular program, which is building harmony between different ethnic, religious factions that have always been trying to, they have not been happy for centuries. And I think I've just gone completely off the topic, but it's how we frame language, how do we use certain phrases. And if we know that we're not very good at being authoritative, then we have to go back. And that's often when I think, okay, we're going to stop doing this, going right back to what is authority? What does it look like for you? And for some people, they have, and I'm sure you would agree with this, a fairly distorted view of authority, because my father was an army officer, and I, always had to sit up straight, shoulder back, head high, and authority. But authority is really not a negative, is it? But what is the authority that works for you and will make a program or something take off and make a situation safer, better, whether it's in a corporation, they want profits, but in the humanitarian sector, they want to save lives. They don't want more wars. I don't know if I've answered your question.
I think that it's a beautiful response. I hear the importance of finding your own authentic, authoritative presence that is representative of your values and your models of authoritative leadership. And that doesn't have to be the stereotypical definition. It can be completely redefined.
And one word I dislike hugely, and it's one I throw out at people, and I'll model it. I always say I don't want passive, because passive segues into laziness in terms of making an effort. And you really have to get people, as you know, inspired to think about a concept and how they can apply it to what they're doing. And then we can do the hard work. Yes.
So you talk about, you've talked on our episode a lot about this idea of knowing what you want to say. And I think that is, for some of us, much easier said than done. Certainly for me, I've noticed over the years that sometimes when I start with why I want to say it or why it's important for me to say, then the what flows more naturally. So even with my podcasting journey, because in the beginning, I really struggled, Susan, particularly with the solo episodes. Conversation has always come naturally to me.
Solo, or this is a
no. This is an interview, so this is easy.
Ex BBC, you'd think I'd know that. Yes.
These have always been easy, but solo episodes where I'm just recording into a mic has been so challenging for me. For many, many reasons. It brings up a lot of perfectionistic tendencies and the analysis of, how am I saying and what am I saying and how is it being perceived and how is it landing? And I also pause a lot when I'm thinking and speaking out loud because I am a slow oral processor. And what I've noticed has made this easier. A couple things. And I'm so curious to hear your thoughts. First of all, it's gotten easier with practice. Absolutely. Some of my first solo episodes, I maybe re-recorded a couple dozen times. Now, I can do a take in one or two takes, and I just write my talking points ahead of time. That's beautiful. Another difference is environmental. So noticing, when am I most sourced internally to show up and speak freely and authentically? That's oftentimes after taking a cold plunge in the ocean or after doing my morning meditation or my morning walk with the dogs, when I'm really internally resourced and grounded, or even connected with that internal sense of play. I'm very playful by nature. Oftentimes that really allows me to be more free-flowing with my voice, which is really cool. And then the third thing, which is where I started this share, is knowing what's important about what I want to say. Like, what's the takeaway from this message? What do I want people to feel from this episode? Like, why do I give a damn about this conversation and this topic? And when I can make that heart connection with my message, it allows the what to flow oftentimes effortlessly. And those are all lessons that I had to learn through a whole lot of trial, a whole lot of start and stop. And that's just my journey. And I'd love to hear from your vantage point.
Well, I just adored listening to that. And I wrote some notes because there was a lot in there. I first would like to say, I think you convey a beautiful serenity, which it's very restful talking to you. And I think because I am high energy, I do, if there were too high energy, I mean, I'm muted. I mean, I'm the real me, don't worry. But, but if I was interviewing me, it would just be, oh my gosh, just tell her to go away. Susan, go home.
I really feel the need just to put in for our audience's visual presence here that Susan is dressed in this bright pink floral dress. She has pink floral peony pillows behind her and a basket of peonies, I think peonies, behind the couch. And it's just vibrant colors and hues of pinks and whites. And so, yes, you definitely come alive.
Well, yes, and I think it's, anyway, you are, the serenity is lovely. And you mentioned you pause a lot. Well, pausing is good. Pausing is great, and you do it very effectively. It's almost as though I'm giving you feedback, but these are just things that I'm picking up. And two things that I really loved that you just said then. Thing about rehearsal. Look, when I started out doing this job, I was a basket case. I'm a perfectionist, but it doesn't inhibit me because I think I know I can master it, and I know that I have. So this was like 15 years ago. But what you said, the rehearsal aspect, because you said, when you first started doing this, the podcasts and the interviews are fine, but the solo is more challenging. And you rehearsed and you got it right. So you're now in your flow. And I'm sure you're just amazingly serene and stimulating and very incredibly impactful for the listeners. I say to people all the time that if you don't have time to rehearse, and this is for a speech or a pitch or anything, then you don't have time to succeed. Simple as that. And look at the results for both of us professionally. And just coming back to this notion of how the what's, whys, and hows of what we say, I have learned, and I suppose it's because a lot of my work is focused on pitching. People have to pitch, that the key message is the thing that will make all the difference. If you know what your key message is, and it is the one thing you want people to remember, it is the backbone of that conversation, that presentation. And then you said that you got very animated when you said you want people to do something. You don't want them just to take it away. What are they going to do with it? And that's where that implicit call to action, I think, is so powerful. If our key message, whatever that might be, has been developed and it has become animated, it isn't passive. I told you I didn't like the word passive. It is animated enough to inspire the listener, to make them think there was something in that. Because as we know, people only remember three things. The first thing we said, maybe something interesting. And if we're lucky, they'll remember the last thing, which is why that bringing it back to, this is what my message was, whatever, and pushing it over to people, because we can only give so much. That's what I say to my various people. I can't be the audience for you. I know what I would do, but you've got to do this. What do you want the audience to do with this? And when I'm training these peace or humanitarians who are pitching to organizations, to philanthropists for money, much needed money, I say to them, you have one job. It is to make them hunt you down during the coffee break, to say, I love that. The collaborative opportunities, research opportunities, Could we do something together? I've got 50 million, we can invest in that. This is why I always say, if you don't have time to rehearse, you don't have time to succeed. So yeah, we're very much on the same page.
Okay. I love all this. There's two more things I want to talk about before we wrap up the episode. So I want to talk more about pitching. And before we go there, I want to talk about embodiment, because something I've been appreciating through the recording of our whole conversation is really the dynamism with which you talk with your hands. And I don't. And I notice, as a coach, I often notice changes in body positions and energy. And really, our body says so much about what we're trying to communicate. And I know that it's a learned skill, but I'm wondering, what has your journey been in becoming so free flowing, movement wise? And how do you train others to really embody their message more?
Again, a beautiful question, because I was discussing this last week in Paris. Content and delivery, body language, they're the same side. Hang on, I was going to say that in French. They are different sides of the same coin, aren't they? And I'll make you laugh with a story. When I first started speaking, and the first speech I gave was for my doctorate, and I was traveling, I can't remember, I was in Melbourne in Australia, and it was I was so lucky, I was the junior researcher, but doctoral researcher, I was volunteered by my university, and I said, yes, I'll go. And the content was brilliant, and the passion was there, and I had rehearsed, and I had notes, but I didn't really need them. But when I saw the film, because they sent clips back, I was mortified, because I saw this maniac of a woman who is going like this manically. And I looked like either a windmill, or actually it was more like a cabin steward director. Exits to the left, doors to the right, and here we go, everyone out of the plane now. And it made me realize how important body language is. Body language can be taught. And I spent half my life rearranging people's bodies. But it's that notion of it has to work for you. And you're a very still and serene person. And I think that serenity is your body language, but I have learned to control mine, because otherwise I would be, your viewers aren't going to see me anyway, so that doesn't matter. But I always use a default position for my hands, especially when I'm speaking. It's a little bit like that. And then and I love body language. And I keep on saying to people, a speech without body language is a robot. It's a wooden automaton, because people connect with people. We're not all here to see, oh my gosh, this pitch, it was so good. But the delivery was, if you can have the best delivery and the worst content, and vice versa. So that is something I spend a lot of time helping people develop, what is working for them. And of course, posture and eye contact, all of these things, which people say, oh, look, I don't need any of that. They just want to hear about the speech. And I did have I won't go into it now because I know we're nearly at the end, but I did have a former ambassador who was on a program for this humanitarian, and I must be very discreet, but terrible body language. And I kept on saying to him, look, wouldn't it be better? You see, being very diplomatic. And he did it his way. He was a real Frank Sinatra. And there was nothing I could do that would change the way he was. And it was wooden. It was just very sad, because it made me look bad as a trainer. No, I'm being mischievous there. But for me, it is so important that people connect with the audience, because the audience have a very short attention span. Within 10 seconds, as you know, they will switch off, or they will think, this is worth listening to. I want to know where this goes. And we have to capture that interest within that first 10 seconds. And I call that I can't remember what I call it. I call it something, but it is critical that we do that.
No, I think there's a lot of potency in what you just said. And a couple things I'm taking away is number one, there has to be resonance between your message and the delivery. It has to fit, it has to match. The second is you have to be able to connect with your audience, not just be rigid in your own world, in your own mind, in your own analysis paralysis of how you're being perceived.
I love that.
And then the third one, which is something I'm appreciating for me personally, is you also just have to be willing to embrace your own authentic posture and your own authentic movement and delivery. And, maybe my style is more serene and I get to explore a little bit more what that looks like.
No, I love it. And I will just say, as you mentioned it, the moment people keep worrying about what the audience is thinking, are they going to like me? Oh my gosh, is this going well? They won't connect with the audience because they're so focused on their speaker centric. And so I always, because I've learned that you can't be speaker centric, it's audience centric. The audience is the most important person. And as I say, even in a podcast where we're not seeing people, do you know what I'm trying to say? It is so important that whatever you're giving and I'm giving to whoever's listening to this is something that they feel there's a connection between the two speakers and they actually care about what is going out there. And I'm sure that's why you have your podcast is so popular and you have so many wonderful people coming onto them. It's the moment you're speaking to people, you have one job, serving them in terms of the information which justifies their time for tuning in or turning up. And if you don't fulfill that contract, then it's not worth it. You may as well walk off the stage.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay, the last topic I want to end on for today is this topic of pitching, which we've mentioned a couple times throughout the episode. And I think this is something that you and I really connected on in our very first chat, because I was sharing a distinction that I use in coaching a lot, which is the distinction of enrollment. And this idea that we are constantly enrolling people in something about us. And as a coach, I'm constantly enrolling my clients in themselves, in who they are, in what they stand for, in what they believe, in the impact they want to have, the difference they want to make, and why they're deserving and worthy of it. And once we do that internal work, we need to be able to touch other people in those conversations and pitch those conversations to other people in order to spread and grow like wildfire the difference we want to have. And so, yeah, I'm just curious from the speaker perspective, how do we grow beyond believing in our own message to bring other people along the journey with us, to find investors and partners and co-conspirators and collaborators to make our messages grow?
Again, we could be discussing for the next 2 days. This is just so stimulating. I love it. To answer it very briefly, yes, investing in ourselves, or as you call it so elegantly, enrolling in ourselves. But we will only make that transition of growing beyond believing, look, I think I'm good, I can do it, but I need other people to believe it. But you really have to believe you are good. That's it. There has to be a passionate conviction, because there isn't a lot of time to convince people if we are hesitating. So if we come on feeling, I know I've come on, I know I've achieved some confidence, but am I good enough? And are they going to believe it? And it comes back to that whole speaker confidence piece, which is the clarity of, we have the authenticity, we know who we are, the clarity of the message which we believe in, and we believe is important enough to share. Then I think if all of those things are working, then businesses will grow, peace foundations will prosper. Dare I say it, if it happened in governments, geopolitical contexts, things would probably be a lot less tragic. But it's believing, not just believing, but showing we believe. I think it comes down, in essence, to conviction and to persuade you that I'm absolutely 3,000% invested in this idea. I can back it up and I'm going to share it. And you might not agree, but I can do it persuasively, eloquently, body language. But that is, to me, and it all comes back to how you started this conversation, authenticity. I think that's how we started. That notion of acknowledging what we are, who we are, how we can become who we wish to be. But it's that authenticity piece. And if it is missing, then all those other pieces aren't going to work. And a pitch or a presentation or a speech or a business will just, it won't take off, will it?
Yeah, I really hear that. I hear authenticity. And another word you used that really speaks to me is conviction.
Yeah.
And I think that conviction and authenticity, they go hand in hand, because when we have conviction, it's so much easier to be authentic.
And look at the way you said it. You see conviction. You see you're passionate about it too.
Yeah, I am.
It's not something that, it's not a word, oh, I've got to be louder. It's conviction. And yeah, I would say that's one of my most important words. Thank you for reminding me that.
Absolutely. Oh, Susan, this has been so delightful. I truly have been looking forward to recording our episode for months, and I'm glad we delayed it. As we wrap for today, I'd love to invite you to share something that I ask of all my guests, which is, what has supported you in becoming the prosperous empath you are?
Oh, well, thank you again for calling me an empath. I think it's something I learned my father used to say to us when we were young children, and all girls in my family. He used to say, and I wrote it down because I remembered it, and I obviously remember it, but I wrote it down just to focus on, if you're going somewhere, be there. And I never understood what he meant. And we always used to say, what does Daddy mean? What's this about? And he'd say, if you're going somewhere, be there. And unfortunately, he passed away 10 years ago. But I increasingly realized, as I came into my own, I don't like to use the word power, but my own convictions and my peaceful space of knowing I can help people, which is what he actually meant. And it guides me, is that if you're going to give a speech, if you're going to teach, if you're going to have a podcast interview, be there, be present, be real, be authentic. Because if you're not, people aren't going to engage. So that's, I think, become very much sorry, I feel a bit emotional because he was a wonderful man. If you're going somewhere, be there.
Thank you for being here with me today. Truly a delight and honor.
Oh, absolutely loved it. And thank you for your sensitive, perceptive, and serene questions, which were such a delight to answer. And the conversation we shared, which was a real pleasure.
And, I just want to end on this note. A decade ago, I did an exercise in a coach training program where we had our life purpose distinguished. And the distinction of purpose through that training was this idea of how your essence is expressed in the world. And my purpose is serenity. And you've since named it a handful of times in the episode.
Yes.
And so, yeah, thank you for reminding me of that.
Well, it's been a delight, and I wish you a lovely day, and I hope we can keep in touch.
Thank you so much for listening today to this episode of the Prosperous Empath podcast with me, Catherine Wood. Make sure you subscribe and leave a review so you don't miss an episode, and so more empaths just like you and me can find the show. As a thank you, each month, one lucky reviewer will receive a 60-minute coaching session with a member of our Unbounded Potential team. You can find all the show notes and bonus resources over at unbounded-potential.com. Thank you so much for listening and locking arms with me to bring empathy and prosperity back into the world of business.